Amen. I want to invite us to lean into the Lord's Prayer. We have been exploring, and I just want to invite to memory and to mind the language that we have leaned into, that we have uncovered a little. This language of parent, father, Abba, Dada, Mama, this intimate claim with God, this claim of birthright that is equal among all people. This naming of God's presence reordering the world, earth as it is in heaven. This prayer that involves our and us, not me and my, our daily bread, our debts. And then this language of debt or trespasses or sins, wherever you learned it, wherever you've heard it, it's all fine. But it all kind of gives us different nuances. And debt reminds us of the realities that the people around Jesus faced. These imposing taxes, this heavy system of greed and imperialism that colonized his people and pulled every resource that could sustain them away, sending folks into prison and into enslavement because of debt. Now I want to draw us into this language of trial. Do not bring us to the time of trial. Sometimes we translate that or add to it this language of temptation, deliver us from temptation. Jesus' community certainly would have understood trials. Ross Pesek shared about this sense of a trial, about this sense of being in a trial, of asking people on the jury to have voice and agency to make a way forward for someone who needs it. The people that are listening to the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Matthew certainly know about trials. They are celebrating a man who experienced an unfair trial by the state of Rome and was crucified. They understand that trials are not quite fair if you don't have all of the money. And perhaps we understand that today too. Do not bring us to the time of trial. Deliver us. It is this urgent prayer. It invites us to think about the culture around us and asks us to be a part of that deliverance. Sometimes we may also think of it in terms of this kind of spiritual struggle. And there would have certainly been folks around Jesus who might have considered it in that way. We know the story of Jesus going into the wilderness and being tempted to use his power in different ways, tempted to turn stones into bread that he may be nourished, tempted to use his power to have authority over communities just like any other king or leader might. And that temptation and that trial in the wilderness, he emerges clear about who he is and how he will be in the world. When we think of temptation, we probably think of 7 deadly sins or maybe the 10 commandments, like the really big ones. And maybe those temptations are not so challenging for us. We know the story of David and Bathsheba. We know these stories of temptation and struggle. We know the story of Abraham tempted and willing to say that his wife was his sister because he didn't want to face conflict. to name their partnership would be risky. There are a diversity of temptations. Maybe our temptations are to kind of minimize these spaces of struggle, to minimize the ways that we might course correct or change how we are in the world, how we can grow in community. I want to invite you to ponder this language for just a moment. Ponder those spaces. See, sometimes I think that we might tempted to just be able to go along and get along and to not do the work of making change. Maybe within ourselves and maybe within the organizations that we touch and are a part of, the institutions where we work, the institutions where we give our time, the institutions where we learn. Those little incremental changes that it would just be easier to try and let go of. It is easy to kind of make those spaces forgettable, to think, well, they're not that big a deal. It can be easy for us to numb when the world is struggling with pain, rather than letting our heart be broken again and again. This Memorial Day weekend, I think we can be tempted to honor it with flags and picnics and parades without doing the real work of how we make a different way forward. I want to invite you to remember just a few little dates. In 1922, the Lincoln Memorial was dedicated on Sunday, May 30th for Memorial Day weekend. And for all of the ways that Lincoln is complicated and a part of our history and a hero, and all the ways that Lincoln invites unity while at the same time stealing the land of indigenous folks. This man, who was the great emancipator, was honored by an audience that was segregated. One of the speakers from the Tuskegee Institute wasn't allowed to sit on the podium. Memorial Day, 1922. Memorial Day was started by a general in Arlington National Cemetery in 1868 as a way of remembering and honoring loss and grief, a way of not just decorating, but declaring an intention of connection. This Memorial Day, we remember a year ago, James Scurlock was killed in our very city, protesting and proclaiming a way that life would matter. His life, Black lives everywhere. 100 years ago, the city of Tulsa faced a massacre. People organizing violently, fueled on by white supremacy. Assaulting Mount Zion Baptist Church. In the aftermath, the insurance companies refused to pay for the damage. And this community continued to pay the mortgage on a building that had been destroyed, and finally dedicated 30 years later a new building, a sign of resilience on this Memorial Day weekend. This weekend, we might also remember, is the anniversary of the Salem witch trials. It might seem like a long time ago, but it is a part of our history. 1692. It began because 2 or 3 teenage young women had a medical condition that the town doctor could not understand or cure or support or help. And so he named that they were bewitched. And then they began to look for those who were bewitching. A woman enslaved to the local minister, a woman who experienced homelessness, and a woman who rarely went to church became the ones at the forefront of the trial. Anyone who objected became a suspect. And by the end of this hysteria, 200 people had been on trial, and 19 people were found guilty and executed, 14 of them women and 5 of them men. Such was the darkness of the day, and so great the lamentations of the afflicted that we walked in clouds and could not see our way. Memorial Day asks us to remember the ways that we are called to live in connection with abundance and care and compassion for all. To remember the ways that we have brought brokenness and to right the wrongs. To do the hard work of diving into the wounds that pull us apart, that make us think we are separate from one another. To do the hard work of listening and hearing and opening our hearts to change. This Memorial Day weekend, may we have the courage to not only remember, but to imagine. To imagine what it means to liberate ourselves and our neighbors from times of trial. To imagine what it means to let go and to move forward in boldness and compassion and generosity. To imagine what it means to live and work and love in community. May we have the courage. May it be so. Amen.